The room went silent when the Miller baby pointed one tiny finger at the woman they had just laughed at and whispered, "Nora." No one moved. Not the grandmother holding a crystal glass near the fireplace. Not the housekeeper standing frozen by the silver tray. Not Charles Miller, the millionaire who had just told the new nanny she looked like she came from a bus station. And definitely not his wife, Vivian, whose smile disappeared so fast it looked like fear. Because their 18-month-old son, Oliver, had barely spoken a word in months. And there was something worse. No one in that mansion had told the baby the nanny's name. 3 hours earlier, Nora Bennett had been standing outside the gates of the Miller estate in Westchester, New York, holding a small brown suitcase and wearing the only clean coat she owned. The mansion looked less like a home and more like a courthouse for rich people. Tall white columns. Long driveway. Black iron gates. A fountain in the center with water dancing like it had never known worry. Nora checked the address again on her phone, though she already knew it was right. She had ridden 2 buses from the Bronx, then walked half a mile because the private road had no sidewalk. Her shoes had mud on the edges. Her hands were cold. But inside her pocket was a printed confirmation from the nanny agency. Temporary live-in nanny. 3 weeks. The pay was enough to cover her overdue rent, her younger brother's medication, and maybe, if she was careful, a real winter coat. The gate buzzed open. By the time Nora reached the front steps, a woman in a navy uniform opened the door. "You're the agency nanny?" "Yes, ma'am." "Nora Bennett." The woman glanced at her suitcase, then at her shoes. "I'm Marisol. I keep this house breathing. Come in before they see you standing there." Nora didn't understand what she meant until she stepped inside. The foyer was full of people. A family gathering was happening around her. Men in suits. Women in designer dresses. A boy around 12 playing with his phone near the staircase. Champagne glasses. White roses. A baby monitor resting beside a bowl of imported chocolates. And in the middle of it all stood Vivian Miller. Perfect hair. Perfect posture. Perfect disappointment. "You're Nora?" Vivian asked. "Yes, Mrs. Miller." Vivian's eyes moved over her like she was inspecting a damaged package. "The agency said you had experience." "I do." "With homes like this?" Nora paused. "With children, ma'am." A short laugh came from the sitting room. Charles Miller stepped forward, tall, silver-haired, wearing a watch that probably cost more than Nora's entire life savings. "That's a clever answer," he said. "But children in homes like this come with standards." Nora swallowed the sting and kept her voice calm. "I understand." Vivian turned toward the others. "Our regular nanny broke her ankle skiing in Aspen. We're desperate, unfortunately." An older woman near the fireplace smiled without kindness. "This one looks more like she needs a nanny than she is one." A few people laughed. Nora's fingers tightened around her suitcase handle. She had been laughed at before. At hospitals. In offices. In grocery stores when her card declined. She knew the rule. Don't react. Don't give people your pain for free. Vivian stepped closer. "Oliver is upstairs. He's sensitive. He doesn't like strangers. He doesn't like loud voices. He doesn't like cheap perfume, processed snacks, or people who smell like public transportation." Nora looked down for half a second. "I don't wear perfume." Charles smirked. "Lucky us." Then came a sound from the baby monitor. A cry. Not a normal cry. A sharp, panicked, breathless cry that made Nora's chest tighten instantly. Vivian sighed. "He's doing it again." Charles looked annoyed. "Where's his nurse?" "She left at noon. Remember?" The cry got worse. Nora turned toward the staircase. "May I go to him?" Vivian hesitated, almost offended by the urgency in Nora's voice. You haven't even washed your hands. I will. But that cry means he's scared, not spoiled. The room changed. Just slightly. Charles frowned. Excuse me? Nora realized she had spoken too directly. I'm sorry. I just mean, he sounds like he needs someone calm. Vivian folded her arms. You may go. Marisol, show her. Nora followed Marisol up the wide staircase, past family portraits and gold-framed mirrors. The crying grew louder with every step. At the end of the hallway was a nursery bigger than Nora's apartment. Soft blue walls. White crib. Expensive toys arranged by color. A rocking chair near the window. And there, standing in the crib with tears on his face, was Oliver Miller. He was small for his age. Brown curls stuck to his forehead. His little hands gripped the crib rail as if the room itself had betrayed him. Nora stopped at the doorway. For 1 second, her breath caught. Not because he was crying. Because she knew that face. Maybe not exactly. Babies change. But the eyes didn't. Those wide brown eyes. That tiny crease between the brows. That scar near the left wrist, faint but still there. Nora gripped the doorframe. Marisol noticed. You okay? Nora blinked fast. Yes. But she wasn't. A memory rose in her like a wave. A hospital room in Queens. Fluorescent lights. Machines beeping softly. A premature baby fighting for breath inside an incubator. A young nurse sitting beside him after midnight, singing the same lullaby every night because his parents were too heartbroken, too busy, or too afraid to stay. Nora had not seen that baby in more than a year. She had never known his last name. Only the name on the NICU tag. Baby Oliver. The crying snapped her back. Nora walked to the crib slowly and washed her hands with sanitizer from the changing table. Hi, sweetheart, she whispered. You don't know me yet. Oliver's crying broke into uneven sobs. Nora didn't pick him up right away. She lowered herself beside the crib until her face was level with his. You're safe, she whispered. I'm right here. Then, without thinking, she hummed. The lullaby came out before she could stop it. Soft. Low. The same tune she used to sing in that hospital room when the machines were the only witnesses. Oliver froze. His crying stopped in the middle of a breath. His little fingers loosened from the rail. Marisol stared at Nora. Downstairs, the family kept talking, unaware that something impossible had just happened upstairs. Oliver slowly sank to his knees in the crib and stared at Nora as if his tiny heart remembered what his mind could not explain. Nora's throat burned. Hey there, little fighter, she whispered. Oliver blinked. Then he reached both arms toward her. When Nora carried him downstairs 10 minutes later, the mansion had changed its sound. The laughter stopped first. Vivian turned from the fireplace. Charles lowered his glass. The older woman raised her eyebrows. Oliver was resting against Nora's shoulder, his face calm, one fist curled into the collar of her coat. Vivian walked over quickly. How did you get him to stop? Nora adjusted the baby gently. I spoke softly. That's it? And I hummed. Vivian looked irritated. He doesn't let strangers hold him. Charles looked at Oliver. Maybe he was exhausted. The older woman smiled sharply. Or maybe he likes charity cases. The room laughed again, but this time the laugh didn't land the same. Because Oliver lifted his head. He looked around at the adults, then looked back at Nora. His tiny hand touched her cheek. And he said it. Clear enough for every person in the room to hear. Nora. The crystal glass in the grandmother's hand clinked against the mantel. Vivian's face went pale. Charles stepped forward. What did he say? Oliver pressed his face back into Nora's shoulder and whispered again. Nora! Nora's eyes filled with tears. She looked down, trying to hide them. Vivian's voice became thin. Did you tell him your name upstairs? Nora shook her head. No. Marisol spoke from behind her. She didn't. I was there. Charles looked at Nora like she had stolen something. How does my son know your name? Nora took a slow breath. I don't know if he knows my name. Maybe he heard someone say it. No, Vivian said quickly. No, he didn't. The room was no longer laughing. The older woman, Charles's mother, stepped closer. Who are you? Nora looked at Oliver. Then at the wealthy family standing around her like judges. My name is Nora Bennett. I was hired through the agency. That is not what I asked, the woman said. Nora's voice stayed quiet. I used to work at St. Catherine's Hospital in Queens. Vivian's eyes changed. Just for a second. A flash of recognition. Charles saw it. Vivian? Vivian turned away. A lot of people work in hospitals. Nora looked at the baby's wrist again. He has a small scar here. From an 4-line. He was premature, wasn't he? The room tightened. Charles's face hardened. How do you know that? Nora held Oliver closer, but gently, protectively. Because I was one of the night nurses in the neonatal unit. Vivian whispered, that hospital had dozens of nurses. Yes, Nora said. But not many stayed in room 12 after their shifts ended. Charles looked at his wife. What is she talking about? Vivian's lips parted, but no answer came. Nora should have stopped. She knew rich families did not like their private pain dragged into the light. But she also knew there was a baby in her arms who had carried a memory no one had honored. When Oliver was in the NICU, Nora said, he had trouble calming after treatments. The monitors would spike. His oxygen would dip when he cried too hard. So I sang to him. Not because it was medicine. Because sometimes a child just needs a voice that keeps coming back. Charles looked stunned. Vivian's face was unreadable. The grandmother said, that is a very moving story, Miss Bennett, but people say many things to get close to wealthy families. Marisol's eyes narrowed. Nora reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out an old folded badge card. It had a faded photo, her name, and St. Catherine's logo. I'm not trying to get close to anyone, Nora said. I'm trying to keep a job. Charles stared at the badge. Vivian's voice trembled with anger, but underneath it was something else. Why aren't you a nurse anymore? That question hit harder than the insult. Nora looked down. For the first time, shame crossed her face. My mother got sick. Then my brother. I missed too many shifts. I asked for family leave, but I was still new. I lost the position. After that, the bills came faster than the interviews. The grandmother scoffed softly. So now we are supposed to feel guilty? No, Nora said. You're supposed to feel grateful that your son remembers kindness, even when adults forget it. The words landed like a slap. Charles turned to Vivian. You knew her. Vivian closed her eyes. And suddenly, the perfect wife in the perfect mansion looked less like a woman in control and more like someone who had been running from one night for a very long time. I knew her voice, Vivian whispered. Charles stared at her. What? Vivian opened her eyes, and tears gathered there. When Oliver was born, I couldn't handle seeing him in that glass box. I know how that sounds. I know it makes me sound cold. But every time I walked into that NICU, I thought he was going to die. I would stand outside the door and hear someone singing to him. She looked at Nora. It was you. Nora said nothing. Vivian's voice cracked. I used to wait in the hallway until you started singing. Then I would go in. Because if you were singing, I knew he was still alive." The room fell completely silent. Charles's anger faded into confusion. "You never told me that." "You were in Chicago closing the merger," Vivian said. "Your mother kept telling me Millers don't fall apart in public. So I fell apart in private." The grandmother looked offended, but for once she had no clever line. Vivian stepped toward Nora. "I asked the hospital about you months later. They said you were gone." Nora's eyes watered. "I didn't leave because I wanted to." Oliver touched Nora's chin and mumbled softly, "No cry." That broke something in the room. Marisol turned her face away. Charles rubbed his forehead. But the grandmother was not ready to surrender. "This is touching, but it doesn't change the situation. She is still staff. A temporary nanny. We don't need to turn this into a family drama." Nora gently handed Oliver toward Vivian. But Oliver clung to her coat. Vivian's hands froze in the air. That tiny rejection cut deeper than anything the adults had said. For the first time, Nora saw the mother's pain clearly. Not arrogance. Fear. Distance. A woman who had survived her son's illness by building walls so high even her child could feel them. Nora softened. "He isn't rejecting you," she said quietly. "He's just scared of losing what feels safe." Vivian looked at her. "How would you know?" "Because I've spent my whole life doing the same thing." Charles looked at Nora differently now. Not as help. Not as a problem. As a person. But justice does not always arrive in one clean moment. Sometimes the truth brings more truth behind it. The next morning, Nora woke before sunrise in the small guest room near the laundry area. She found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a check for 1 week's pay. And a note. "Your services are no longer required." No signature. Nora stared at it, her chest going cold. She knew immediately who had done it. Not Vivian. Not Charles. The grandmother. Margaret Miller. Nora packed quietly. She did not cry. She had cried too many times in places where no one cared. But as she walked through the kitchen with her suitcase, Marisol blocked the doorway. "No," Marisol said. Nora gave a tired smile. "It's okay." "No, it is not okay. I can't fight these people." Marisol folded her arms. "Then don't fight alone." Before Nora could answer, Oliver's cry erupted from upstairs. Then Vivian's voice. "Where is Nora?" Nora closed her eyes. Footsteps thundered down the staircase. Vivian appeared in a robe, barefoot, hair undone, panic on her face. "Nora? Why are you leaving?" Nora held up the envelope. Vivian snatched the note and read it. Her expression changed. Not hurt. Not embarrassed. Furious. Margaret entered from the dining room, dressed perfectly at 7 in the morning. "I handled an uncomfortable situation," she said. Vivian turned on her mother-in-law. "You fired the woman who comforted my child when I couldn't?" Margaret lifted her chin. "I protected this family." Charles came down behind them, tying his robe. "What is going on?" Vivian held up the note. "Your mother dismissed Nora." Charles took it, read it, and looked at Margaret. "Without speaking to us?" Margaret's voice remained calm. "You were becoming emotionally confused. That woman used a hospital story to make herself important." Nora stepped back. "I'll go." Vivian turned quickly. "No." That single word echoed through the foyer. Oliver was crying upstairs, calling something that sounded like Nora again and again. Vivian's eyes filled. "My son is calling for someone. And for once in this house, we are going to answer the child, not the pride." Charles looked at his mother. "You crossed a line." Margaret's mouth tightened. I built this family's reputation. Charles's voice dropped. No. You built fear and called it standards. For the first time, Margaret looked wounded. But Charles was not finished. I heard you laugh at her shoes yesterday. I laughed too. That was my shame. Not hers. He turned to Nora. I owe you an apology. Nora looked at him, unsure if she could trust the moment. Charles continued. You walked into my home and treated my son with more respect than I showed you. I'm sorry. Vivian walked closer, tears falling openly now. I am sorry too. Not just for yesterday. For every night I let a stranger love my baby more bravely than I could. Nora's voice was gentle. You were afraid. I was his mother. You were both. Vivian broke then. Not loudly. Just a quiet collapse of the face, the kind that happens when someone has been holding guilt too long. Nora set her suitcase down. Upstairs, Oliver cried again. This time, Vivian wiped her tears and looked at Nora. Will you come with me? Nora nodded. Together, they went upstairs. In the nursery, Oliver stood in his crib, red-faced and trembling. Nora stayed by the door. Vivian walked to him first. Her hands shook. Hi, baby, she whispered. It's Mommy. Oliver sniffled, looking past her. Vivian's face crumpled, but she didn't retreat. She hummed. Not perfectly. Not beautifully. But the same lullaby. Nora had never taught it to her. Vivian had learned it in a hospital hallway, one broken night at a time. Oliver stopped crying. His eyes moved from Nora to Vivian. Vivian kept humming, tears dripping onto her robe. Slowly, Oliver reached for his mother. Vivian picked him up and held him like she was afraid and grateful at the same time. Nora watched from the doorway, her own eyes shining. That was the moment the mansion became a home. Not because the rich learned a lesson. Not because the poor woman was finally praised. But because a child's memory had pulled the truth out of everyone. 2 weeks later, Nora stood in a courtroom in White Plains. Not as a defendant. Not as a witness. As a woman getting a second chance. Charles had called the director of St. Catherine's Hospital himself. Vivian had written a letter, then another, and then sat in person with the hospital board, explaining what Nora had done for Oliver when no one was watching. It turned out Nora had not been fired for misconduct. She had been let go for attendance during a family medical crisis, and one administrator had buried her rehire request under paperwork. The hospital offered her a return-to-practice program. Part-time at first. Paid training. Childcare assistance. A path back to nursing. Nora cried when she signed the papers. Outside the courthouse, Vivian waited with Oliver on her hip. Charles stood beside them, holding Nora's old suitcase. Margaret was not there. She had gone to Palm Beach, according to Marisol, to recover from the humiliation of accountability. Nora laughed when she heard that. For the first time in months, it didn't hurt to laugh. Vivian stepped forward. We still need a nanny, she said softly. But only if it doesn't take you away from nursing. Nora smiled. I can do evenings until the hospital schedule starts. Charles nodded. At double the agency rate. Nora raised an eyebrow. Triple, Marisol said from behind them. Everyone turned. Marisol stood near the courthouse steps with coffee in one hand and a look that dared anyone to disagree. Charles sighed. Triple. Nora smiled, but her eyes were on Oliver. He reached for her. Nora, he said. This time, no one was shocked. Vivian kissed the top of his head. Yes, sweetheart, she whispered. That's Nora. Nora touched his little hand. No, Oliver said, frowning with the seriousness only a toddler can have. Then he patted his own chest. Ollie. Everyone laughed softly. Then he patted Nora's hand. Nora. Then he reached back and touched Vivian's cheek. Mommy. Vivian covered her mouth. Charles looked away, blinking fast. Because sometimes justice is not a punishment. Sometimes justice is a child finally feeling safe enough to name the people who love him. Months later, Nora returned to St. Catherine's Hospital wearing fresh scrubs and a new badge. Her first night back, she passed the neonatal unit and stopped at the glass. Inside, a tiny baby slept beneath warm lights. A young mother sat nearby, terrified, hands folded like prayer. Nora walked in quietly. First night? She asked. The mother nodded, tears in her eyes. I'm scared to touch her. Nora pulled up a chair. I know. The mother looked at her. Does it get easier? Nora glanced at the tiny baby, then thought of Oliver in a mansion full of polished floors and lonely rooms. It gets honest, she said. And that's where love starts. Then she began to hum. Softly. Low. The kind of song that asks for nothing but gives a frightened heart somewhere to rest. And far away in Westchester, in a blue nursery, Oliver Miller slept peacefully while his mother hummed the same tune beside his crib. The family who once judged a woman by her coat now trusted her with the truth they had hidden from themselves. And Nora Bennett, who had walked through their door as someone they thought they could look down on, left behind something no money could buy. A reminder that every person carries a story you cannot see. The shoes may be worn. The coat may be old. The voice may be quiet. But kindness has a way of being remembered. Even by the smallest hearts. And sometimes, the person a family mocks at the door is the very person heaven sent to bring love back inside.